All right, the goal today is to start looking at converses. Recall that a converse is what happens when you flip an if-then statement. So we go back to our notes from Tuesday. Parallel lines, if you know you have them, and they are cut by a transversal, then you get all of the following things. Corresponding angles, alternate interior angles, and alternate exterior angles are congruent, where consecutive, both interior and exterior angles are supplementary. A converse is when we flip that if-then statement around. So we can change it to if you have those two lines cut by a transversal so that a pair of corresponding angles are congruent. See, now congruent comes first, then the lines are parallel. So this whole section is still playing with the same relationships. Hey, corresponding angles, are they congruent? Consecutive interior angles, are they supplementary? We're still playing with the same relationships, just going the other direction. So for example, if we know that angle 1 and angle 5 are congruent, if we know those angles have equal measure, then we know the lines are parallel. So in this case, our lines are L and M. So if I can find some way to show that those two measures are equal, then I know L and M are parallel lines. Likewise, for alternate interior angles, if I can find a pair of alternate interior angles, say 4 and 6, if I know that those are congruent, in other words, if I know their angles have equal measure, then I also know the lines are congruent. That'll become the game that we play, is trying to find one of these relationships that holds. One last congruent example would be alternate exterior angles. If I find a pair of alternate exterior angles, say 2 and 8, for example, if I know that those are congruent, then I know my lines are parallel. So not everything is about congruence. Recall that we do have two properties we expect supplementary relationships out of. And that would be our consecutive interior angles. So let's switch over to a red highlighter here. Alternate exterior, alternate interior angles, something like 3 and 6, for example. If I know that 3 and 6 are supplementary, in other words, their measures add to 180, if I know that that happened, then I know my lines are parallel. Because again, we have true converses here, flipping that if-then statement around. Last but not least, consecutive exterior. If I know, for example, consecutive exterior, something like 1 and 8 on the same side of the transversal, just on the outside of the parallel lines. If I know those are supplementary, then again, I know that my lines are parallel. So I know that here, there's just a lot of text. There's a lot going on in these notes, but every single one of these long statements is just a converse to a statement we've already played with. Let's look at a couple of examples to show that this really isn't as scary as it might first seem. So taking a look at my very first example here, they're asking me to determine if the lines are parallel. Note, I'm not given that the lines are parallel like we did get in previous examples. I have to determine if the lines are parallel based on the information given. This is a one-step proof. I know the word proof is scary. So I have two 63-degree angles there. Those angles happen to be alternate, because they're on opposite sides of that transversal, exterior angles. But the converse tells us that if alternate exterior angles are congruent, then my lines are parallel. So yes, the lines are parallel. Yes, the lines are parallel. And then they do say if yes, if they are parallel, state the converse that proves it. Well, it's the alternate exterior angles converse, because my alternate exterior angles are congruent. Looking at example 2, they didn't give us any numbers, but they did use tick marks there. So the goal is to match up those tick marks. There's one tick mark in each angle. So we know those angles are congruent. The question is, how does that help us? Maybe if we draw in that box, it's easier to see. Note that those angles are both in the upper right side of that box where all the four intersections happen. So we do have corresponding angles, ones in the same position, that are congruent. So yes, the lines are parallel. They're parallel by the corresponding angles converse, because I have congruent corresponding angles. Jumping over to 3, suddenly I don't have congruence anymore. So, maybe you're tempted to say, oh, nothing works here. But note the angle pair that we get. These are consecutive. They're on the same side of the transversal, consecutive interior angles. So I'm not checking congruence there. What I'm checking is supplementary. 132 plus 48. Well, 132 plus 48 does equal 180. So these angles are supplementary, and because they are consecutive exterior angles, we know our lines are parallel. So yes, the lines are parallel. Move this up here. So taking a look at 4. Taking a look at 4, we do get congruent angles there. Both of those angles are 105. But if you look at all of our options, and again, our options, just all of this stuff, there is no vertical angles converse. Those angles are congruent because they're vertical angles. That has nothing to do with the parallel lines. Those lines might be parallel, they might not be, but there is no converse to prove it. So we have to assume no. Because they didn't give us alternate interior, alternate exterior, or corresponding angles, we can't say anything about those parallel lines. So with the information given, we have to go with no. We have to go with no. Taking a look at 5. In 5 here, we've got those two tick marks, again showing us that those angles are congruent. As far as what kind of angle pair we have, well, they're on opposite sides of the transversal, in between the parallel lines. So that is alternate interior angles, and this is the converse we're looking at here. Last but not least, looking at number 6, well, now we've got consecutive interior angles. So let's double check. Do those add up to 180? 5 plus 5 is 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 100, 190? Oh dear. Yeah, unfortunately, those lines are not parallel because our consecutive interior angles were not supplementary. So again, our first 6 examples here, just looking at simple diagrams. If you're having trouble with these 6 examples, at this point I recommend raising a hand. Maybe I can come up with a few more examples to help you out here before moving on to the next 2 examples, because the next few diagrams are going to get a bit busier. So make sure you understand these 6 cases before moving on. But once you're ready to move on, hey, I'll see you then.